In this section, we'll look at the first couple of years of the presidency of Jimmy Carter and what he did domestically. Carter, of course, followed Ford into the White House. Carter was from Georgia, and he had gone and went to Annapolis and become a nuclear engineer in the Navy, and ultimately he was going to become governor of Georgia. After his military career, he actually returned to Georgia and sort of took over the family farm, and he worked as a peanut farmer. Now, this is important because when he ran for governor of Georgia and of course later as running for president, he appealed to sort of an everyman, a farmer. It appealed to a nation disillusioned by Watergate. He appeared the consummate outsider. Here we have a picture on the top right of Carter in jeans. It just wasn't common to see someone running for president in jeans. Carter professed to be a born-again Christian who would never lie to the American people. He was very overt in his religion, and he even gave an interview to Playboy magazine where he admitted that he lusted for women. So here's a guy that's stating the obvious, and he's never going. He's just all out there. He's the opposite of Nixon. He's never going to lie to you, and his name is Jimmy Carter. It's very common, very informal, and a big smile. He just spared the antidote to the Watergate era. Carter appeared a moderate Democrat, sort of a new type of Democrat from the South, less associated with the cultural and political liberalism of the 1960s, which of course was more prominent in the northern part of the country and the Democratic Party. Anyway, Carter selected Minnesota Senator Walter Mondale as his running mate. In the presidential debates, the incumbent Ford actually stumbled when he suggested that there was no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, which is kind of obvious, and that really helped Carter. Carter won just about 50% of the vote in a relatively close election. The election was noteworthy in that Carter carried the South at a time apparently reversing, the ongoing Republican gains in the region. Again, Nixon's Southern strategy. In fact, the 1976 election would prove the last election in which Democrats swept the South, and that was, of course, because Carter was from Georgia, the heart of the South. Carter began his presidency by proposing an aggressive energy agenda. Problems soon emerged, however, as Carter wanted to eliminate price controls and let the higher prices promote conservation. Higher prices mean people wouldn't use as much. He also proposed an elaborate combination of tax incentives and new taxes to promote both conservation and new energy development. Most Democrats, however, again quite liberal from the North, wanted to retain the controls and the regulations. In addition, the various proposed taxes angered a number of voting blocs. Anyway, the final result didn't come for over a year, and by then Congress had eviscerated Carter's original agenda. The result was a weak compromise that accomplished little. The only real significant accomplishment early was the creation of a new department to coordinate federal efforts, the U.S. Department of Energy. The battle over energy policy really demonstrated a central weakness of Carter's presidency. As an outsider, Carter appeared kind of preachy with Congress. He didn't really fully respect congressional traditions, and this angered many in his own party and hurt his own agenda. It's important to note that during the Carter years, Christian conservatives who had been annoyed by the cultural liberalism of the 1960s, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that, they became more politically involved, and they largely supported Carter in the 1976 election because they saw one of their own in him. He was a righteous, evangelical, born-again Southern Baptist. So, people that supported the famous preacher Billy Graham really sort of came out for the first time for Carter. These cultural Christians were really influential during the Carter presidency in leading to the ultimate failure of ERA ratification. It was in the early Reagan years that the ERA finally, the deadline for ratification finally ran out. But during the Carter years, momentum for ratification really began to falter, and a lot of that was because of these Christian conservatives. They saw ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, as attacking God's plan for the nuclear family. Moreover, of course, during the Carter presidency, it was in the wake of the Roe v. Wade decision on abortion, and abortion rights were just growing much more contentious. It's during the Carter years you really see two camps forming, the pro-life and pro-choice camps, as they call themselves, and they're going to battle in the political arena. Leading the pro-life movement were these social conservative, religious conservatives. Religious conservatives were able to get Congress to pass the first restrictions on abortion, the so-called Hyde Amendment, named for the staunchly anti-abortion congressman from Illinois, Henry Hyde, shown here on the left. The legislation prohibited federal appropriations for abortions. Every year they'd pass the Hyde Amendment onto appropriations bills. The religious conservatives also resisted the growing gay rights movement, which actually received a boost during the Carter presidency with the national publicity that surrounded Harvey Milk, a gay rights advocate from San Francisco. Milk became the first openly gay man to hold a major office. He was on the city council of San Francisco, but he was murdered, and when he was murdered, he became a martyr for the gay rights movement. There was a huge march and rally in San Francisco, and that's a seminal event in gay and lesbian history. Now, it's important to note that, like religious conservatives, Carter thought abortion and homosexuality sinful. He didn't, however, think it was the right of the government to restrict personal rights. And as a result, he didn't do much to help the fight against abortion and homosexuality. In fact, some of Carter's staff were pro-gay rights, and they agreed to meet with gay rights advocates in the White House. And this meeting infuriated religious conservatives, as did Carter's support for the ERA ratification. As Carter's presidency unfolded, therefore, religious conservatives increasingly turned against him, the very group that had initially favored him. And they began to form new groups during the Carter presidency, like Jerry Falwell's The Moral Majority. These ministers like Falwell and Pat Robertson attacked Carter, and in 1980 they decided to back the Republicans. And this was the beginning of what we call today the modern religious right. And it was another step in the growing Republican strength in the South, because many of these religious conservatives were, of course, from the South. In any event, this concludes a section on the early Carter years.